The security badge that had opened every door in the building for 15 years suddenly flashed red. Access denied. My name is Marcus Chen, and I was standing in the lobby of the company I'd helped build from a struggling startup into a Fortune 500 corporation, holding a cardboard box and watching my life's work slip away. What my boss, Richard Blackstone, didn't know when he fired me that morning was that I still had access to something far more valuable than any office or computer terminal, and by the time he figured it out, it would be too late. But let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about revenge, it's about justice. 15 years ago, I walked into a cramped office space above a pizza joint, fresh out of MIT with a computer science degree. The company had 12 employees, 2 servers held together with duct tape, and a CEO who wore the same wrinkled polo shirt 3 days in a row. That CEO was Richard Blackstone, and back then he was different. Hungry, collaborative, someone who remembered everyone's coffee order and stayed late to help debug code. "Marcus," he said during my interview, "I need someone who can build something that lasts. Someone who can grow with us." I believed him. Over the next decade and a half, I became the company's backbone. Every major system, every security protocol, every line of critical infrastructure code had my fingerprints on it. When we went from 12 employees to 1,200, when we moved from that cramped office to a gleaming downtown headquarters, I was there. I designed the customer database that now held 3 million records. I architected the payment processing system that handled $2 billion annually. I created the security framework that protected everything from employee payroll to client trade secrets. Richard kept promoting me, kept giving me more responsibility. For years, we were partners in building something extraordinary. Then the acquisition talk started. Richard started hiring consultants, expensive ones with buzzword-heavy presentations. They talked about optimization and streamlining operations and maximizing value for potential acquirers. "Just part of growing up as a company," Richard assured me when I expressed concerns. "We need to look professional for the big players." But I noticed things. The consultants were asking detailed questions about my role, my responsibilities, my salary. They wanted documentation for systems I'd built organically over years. "Can someone else run these systems if Marcus isn't available?" I overheard one consultant ask. "That's what we're trying to determine," Richard replied. 6 months ago, Richard hired Amanda Price as our new Chief Technology Officer. She came from a Fortune 100 company with an impressive resume and an even more impressive attitude. During our first meeting, she made it clear that she viewed my custom-built systems as legacy challenges that needed modern solutions. "Marcus," she said, "you've done amazing work here, but we need to think about scalability, about industry standards, about making sure we're not dependent on any single person." The way she said "single person" made my stomach clench. "These systems are documented," I replied carefully. "I've maintained comprehensive records of everything." Amanda smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Documentation and actual transferable knowledge are 2 different things, don't you think? Over the following months, Amanda systematically began undermining my authority. She hired younger engineers to study my systems. She brought in vendors to pitch replacement solutions. She scheduled meetings about my projects without including me. When I raised concerns with Richard, he gave me the same response every time. "Amanda knows what she's doing. Trust the process." But the process felt like a slow-motion execution. The irony wasn't lost on me that as the company prepared for its biggest financial success, my personal life was falling apart. My wife, Sarah, had been fighting cancer for 2 years. Stage 3 breast cancer that required aggressive treatment. The company's health insurance covered most of her treatments. My salary paid for the experimental therapies. My flexible schedule, earned through 15 years of proving myself indispensable, allowed me to drive her to chemotherapy appointments. Richard knew all of this. He'd personally approved my flexible schedule, had even sent flowers to the hospital. "Take care of your family first," he'd told me. "We'll handle things here." 3 weeks before my termination, Sarah's latest scan showed the cancer was in remission. For the first time in 2 years, we'd started making plans again. I should have seen the timing as suspicious. The meeting request came on a Tuesday morning. Quick check-in with Richard, conference room B at 10 a.m. I arrived 5 minutes early to find Amanda already there, along with Janet from HR and 2 men in expensive suits. Richard sat at the head of the table, not making eye contact. "Marcus, please sit down," Janet said, her voice artificially gentle. I knew immediately. After 15 years, you develop instincts about these things. "We're restructuring the technology department," Amanda began, reading from a prepared statement. "As part of our preparation for the acquisition, we need to transition to more standardized systems and processes." She paused, glancing at Richard, who still wouldn't look at me. "Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. 15 years of 60-hour weeks of building something from nothing, gone in a single sentence. "I don't understand," I said, though I understood perfectly. "My performance reviews have been excellent. The systems are running perfectly." One of the men in suits leaned forward. "Mr. Chen, this isn't about performance. It's about organizational efficiency. The acquiring company has their own technical infrastructure." "Which acquiring company?" I asked. Richard finally looked up. "That's not finalized yet." But I could see it in his eyes. It was finalized. "The severance package is generous," Janet continued, sliding a folder across the table. 6 months' salary plus extended health coverage for a year. 6 months for 15 years of my life. "We'll need you to transition your responsibilities over the next 2 weeks," Amanda added, "full documentation of all systems and processes." 2 weeks to document 15 years of custom architecture and organic processes. 2 weeks, I said. "We understand it's a tight timeline," Amanda replied. "But the transition team is very capable." The transition team? Young engineers who'd been shadowing me for months, taking notes, asking questions I now realized were part of a systematic knowledge extraction. "I'll need to think about this," I said, standing up. "Actually," one of the suits interjected, "we need an answer today. The severance package is contingent on immediate acceptance and full cooperation with the transition." I looked at Richard, the man who'd once told me I was like a brother to him. "Is this really how you want to do this?" He met my eyes for the first time during the meeting. "It's not personal, Marcus. It's just business." Just business. 15 years of partnership reduced to just business. "I'll take the package," I said quietly. What they didn't know was that I'd just made the most strategic decision of my professional life. Over the next 2 weeks, I did exactly what they asked. I documented systems, trained the transition team, answered their questions with helpful detail. I was the model of cooperation. But cooperation doesn't mean transparency. When you build a company's entire technical infrastructure from scratch, you don't just know how things work, you know how they really work. During those 2 weeks, I discovered something interesting. Richard had signed a letter of intent with Meridian Corp, a massive conglomerate known for buying companies and stripping out the valuable technology. The deal was worth $800 million. Richard stood to personally make $200 million. Amanda was getting a $5 million retention bonus. My 15 years of work had helped create that value. The systems I'd built were specifically mentioned in the acquisition documents as key technical assets. Yet I was being eliminated to reduce redundant costs. But here's what they didn't understand about the systems I'd built. They weren't just code and databases, they were relationships, interconnected dependencies that I'd created not just for functionality, but for security. Every critical system had multiple layers of authentication. Every process had backup procedures that required specific knowledge. Every database had recovery protocols that weren't fully documented because I'd never expected to leave. And then there were the access levels, not the obvious ones that showed up in user directories, the ones I'd built into the architecture itself, debug modes, and administrative backdoors and system-level privileges that I'd coded into the foundation of everything. It wasn't malicious, it was practical. When you're responsible for keeping million-dollar systems running at 3 a.m., you build yourself ways to fix things quickly. Over 15 years, I'd accumulated access that existed in the code itself, not just in the user management systems, and I still had all of it. On my last day, I cleared out my office while Amanda supervised. She watched me pack my personal items, making sure I didn't take any company property. What she didn't realize was that I wasn't taking anything. I was leaving something behind. A small device, no bigger than a thumb drive, tucked behind my desk. It wasn't sophisticated technology, just a simple network bridge that would give me remote access to the internal systems. "I think that's everything," I said, picking up my box. 2 guards walked me to the lobby. I handed over my security badge, my laptop, my company phone. Everything that officially connected me to 15 years of my life. But not everything that actually connected me. The first week after my termination, I did what any recently unemployed person does. I updated my LinkedIn profile, reached out to former colleagues, started job hunting. I told Sarah the whole story. "They made a mistake," she said quietly. "They'll realize it soon enough." She was right, though not in the way either of us expected. I started monitoring the company's systems from my home office, not maliciously, just checking to see how the transition was going. The answer was, not well. Day 3 after my departure, the payment processing system went down for 6 hours. The young engineers couldn't figure out why the backup servers weren't automatically taking over. I knew why. The failover process required a manual authentication sequence that I'd built in after a security breach. It wasn't in the documentation because it was one of those things you just knew to do. Day 7, the customer database started throwing errors. They spent 2 days trying to debug code that was working perfectly fine. The problem wasn't the code, it was a memory management issue that only manifested under specific load conditions. Day 12 brought the security framework crashes. User authentication started failing randomly, locking out both employees and customers. The new team couldn't understand why the system kept rejecting valid credentials. They didn't know about the load balancing algorithms I'd implemented that required specific timing sequences. By week 2, customer complaints were flooding in. Major clients were threatening to leave due to system instability. The company's reputation, built over 15 years of reliable service, was crumbling in real time. By day 10, Richard was personally calling emergency meetings. I know because I still had access to the calendar system. The cascade of failures was becoming impossible to ignore. The email server started rejecting messages from major clients, flagging them as potential security threats due to authentication protocols only I understood. The backup systems, designed to activate during emergencies, remained dormant because they required specific manual triggers that weren't documented anywhere except in my memory. Most critically, the financial reporting system began generating incorrect data. The algorithms I'd built to calculate revenue metrics and track customer payments were producing numbers that didn't match reality. The accounting department was panicking, unable to reconcile books that had been perfectly accurate for years. By the end of week 2, 3 major clients had already terminated their contracts, citing unacceptable system reliability. The company's customer service lines were overwhelmed with complaints, and social media was buzzing with frustrated users sharing screenshots of error messages and failed transactions. "What's the status on the database issues?" I watched him ask during a video conference. "We're working on it," one of the young engineers replied. "The code is complex. Marcus built a lot of custom integrations that aren't immediately obvious." Amanda looked uncomfortable. "How long until these issues are resolved?" "Hard to say, maybe a few weeks. We're still trying to understand the full architecture." A few weeks, with the Meridian acquisition scheduled to close in 6 weeks. That's when Richard made his first mistake. Instead of reaching out to me professionally, he tried to force it. I received a letter from the company's legal department demanding that I provide additional documentation under the terms of my severance agreement. They claimed I had been deliberately withholding critical information. I called my own lawyer. "Do they have a case?" I asked. David Martinez read through the letter and my severance agreement. "Not really," he said finally. "Your severance agreement requires reasonable cooperation during the transition period. You provided that. They can't compel you to provide ongoing support after termination without additional compensation. They're trying to intimidate you into fixing their problems for free," he said. "Classic corporate bullying." What should I do? What do you want to do? I wanted Sarah to never have to worry about health insurance again. I wanted recognition for 15 years of dedicated work. I wanted Richard to understand what he'd thrown away, but most of all, I wanted justice. "I want to propose a consulting arrangement," I said, finally. "Market rate for specialized knowledge, full payment up front." The consulting proposal I sent back was professional and expensive, $500 per hour, minimum 20-hour engagement, payment in advance. Amanda's response came within an hour. "We'll find other solutions." I shrugged and went back to job hunting, but I kept monitoring their systems. By week 3, the problems were cascading. The payment processing downtime was affecting customer confidence. The database errors were corrupting transaction records. The security framework was throwing false positives that were locking out legitimate users. Richard started working weekends. I could see him through the security cameras, pacing in his office, making phone calls that looked increasingly desperate. Then Amanda made her second mistake. She hired an external consulting firm that specialized in technical crisis management. The consulting firm's first recommendation was to completely rebuild the core systems. Timeline, 4 to 6 months. Cost, $3.2 million. I learned all this because the project manager sent his initial assessment to the wrong email distribution list, including automated accounts that I still had access to. The email was devastating. The current architecture appears to be a complex web of interdependent custom solutions with minimal documentation. We recommend complete replacement rather than attempting to reverse engineer the existing code base. Translation. I'd built something so sophisticated that even experts couldn't figure it out quickly enough to save the acquisition. Richard called an emergency board meeting. The subject line was simply Meridian's situation. The next day, I received a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. "Marcus? This is Tom Hendricks from Meridian Corporation. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" Tom was the vice president of technology for Meridian, the company that was supposed to acquire us. Word had gotten back to them about the technical difficulties. "I understand you were recently let go," Tom said carefully. "I also understand you built most of the systems we're acquiring." "That's correct. We're concerned about the transition timeline. Our technical due diligence was based on the assumption that these systems would be stable and maintainable. Recent developments suggest that might not be the case." I waited, let him fill the silence. "Would you be interested in a conversation about consulting opportunities? Meridian values institutional knowledge." Now this was interesting. The acquiring company was reaching out directly, going around Richard and Amanda entirely. "I'm always open to new opportunities," I said, carefully. "Let's meet in person. Are you available tomorrow?" The Meridian offices were everything our company aspired to be: sleek, modern, efficient. Tom Hendricks was a calm, methodical man in his 50s. "Here's our situation," he said, without preamble. "We're supposed to close this acquisition in 18 days. The technical systems are critical to our integration strategy, but we're now learning that these systems might not be as stable or transferable as we were led to believe." He showed me a detailed analysis of our company's technical infrastructure. According to this assessment, the core systems are essentially non-transferable without the original architect. That would be you. I reviewed the slides. They weren't wrong. "What does this mean for your acquisition?" I asked. Tom's expression hardened slightly. "It means we're reconsidering the deal structure. The valuation was based partly on the assumption that we were acquiring mature, maintainable technology assets. If those assets require significant rebuilding, that changes our numbers substantially." He paused. "However, if we could retain the original architect as part of the transition, that might restore the value proposition." I felt a smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. "What kind of retention are you thinking about?" "Full-time position with Meridian, VP level, 20% salary increase over your previous role, stock options, and a $150,000 signing bonus to compensate for the disruption you've experienced." It was vindication. But I had one more question. "What happens to the existing management team?" Tom's smile was cold. "That's being reevaluated." I asked for 48 hours to consider the offer. Tom agreed, but mentioned that Meridian's board was meeting in 2 days to decide whether to proceed with the acquisition at all. "Your decision will significantly influence ours," he said. That evening, I told Sarah about the offer. "What do you want to do?" "I want to take it," I said. "But not just for the money. I want to be there when Richard realizes what his business decision actually cost him." Sarah smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her since my termination. "Then take it. You've earned the right to see this through." The next morning, I called Tom and accepted Meridian's offer. By afternoon, I had a signed contract and a $150,000 wire transfer. I didn't call Richard to tell him. I figured he'd find out soon enough. He did. Meridian's lawyers contacted his lawyers that afternoon with a revised acquisition proposal. The purchase price was reduced by $200 million due to technical risks and integration challenges. The deal now included mandatory retention of key technical personnel, specifically me, as a condition of closing. Richard could either accept the reduced price and bring me back at a senior level, or Meridian would walk away entirely. My phone rang at 6 p.m., Richard's name on the caller ID. "Marcus," he said when I answered. His voice was strained, tired. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Meridian has made some demands about the technical transition, about bringing you back." I heard a long pause. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. How was it supposed to go, Richard? "You have every right to be angry."
"I'm not angry," I said, and realized it was true. "I'm disappointed. 15 years, Richard. We built something together, and you threw it away for a consulting report."
"But you were dependent on me. The systems, the architecture, the institutional knowledge. That was 15 years of work. You can't transfer that in 2 weeks to people who've never seen it before." "Will you consider coming back?" he asked finally. "As part of the Meridian deal?" "I'm not coming back, Richard. I'm moving forward. Meridian offered me a VP position with them directly. I start Monday."
"What does that mean for us, for the acquisition?"
"That's between you and Meridian." "But Richard," I paused, "if you'd approached this differently, if you'd treated me like the partner I thought I was instead of a cost center to be eliminated, we could have worked something out. Can we still?" "Number. You made your choice when you had security escort me out. You chose to listen to consultants who'd been here for 6 months instead of trusting someone who'd been there for 15 years. The line was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't fix this." I hung up and turned off my phone. The next day, Meridian announced they were walking away from the acquisition. The technical risks and integration costs made the deal unviable at any price. Within hours, our company's stock price collapsed. The acquisition had been the only reason investors were holding the shares, Without it, the company was just another mid-sized software firm with aging infrastructure and mounting technical debt. Amanda was fired that afternoon. The board blamed her for the failed technical transition and the collapsed deal. Richard lasted another month. The board eventually realized that losing both the acquisition and their most senior technical person was a combination of mistakes they couldn't recover from. He was replaced by an interim CEO brought in to either find another buyer or prepare for bankruptcy. But here's the thing about justice. It's not just about watching your enemies fail. It's about building something better from the wreckage. Meridian offered me something Richard never had, the chance to build a technology organization from the ground up with proper resources, reasonable timelines, and respect for institutional knowledge. 6 months later, I was leading a team of 30 engineers, building systems that made my old company's infrastructure look primitive. Sarah's health remained stable, her treatments fully covered by Meridian's excellent insurance. We bought that house in the Better School District and started talking seriously about kids. And every morning when I walked into Meridian's gleaming offices, I passed a newspaper stand with headlines about my former company's continuing struggles to find a buyer. The final irony came a year after my termination. My former company, desperate to salvage something from their failed infrastructure, reached out to Meridian about licensing some of our newer technology platforms. I was asked to review the proposal. I recommended we decline, not out of spite, but because their technical debt was so extensive that our systems wouldn't integrate properly. It would be throwing good money after bad. "Are you sure?" Tom asked during the review meeting. "It's a substantial licensing fee." "I'm sure," I said. "Trust me, I know their systems better than anyone." Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply moving forward and building something better while the people who wronged you struggle with the consequences of their own decisions.
Richard had told me it wasn't personal, just business. He was right. My success at Meridian wasn't personal either. It was just good business.
And good business, as it turns out, is the most satisfying revenge of all.